Just you.
So I started painting when I was in 9th grade. I remember driving with my dad and just telling him I'd kind of like to start painting. And I woke up the next day and he had everything I could ever possibly need to paint all laid out for me. And I've just kind of been at it ever since. So I went on to college. I went to St. Cloud State University. Originally went for art education. My last semester I switched to fine arts and got a BFA in painting and drawing. And during college and after college I painted houses for about 10 years, and I've been doing my artwork full-time for the last 3 years. So transparent mindset when painting watercolor. So you build your values from light to dark, and you never use any white paint. And there's all these sacred rules to painting transparently that you feel like you can't break. And then you kind of realize one day you're like, who cares? Why does it matter? You can do anything. You're a painter. Me and Frank were talking about that before class. So one of my big influences is Stephen Quiller, and he uses all sorts of water media. And so I had the pleasure actually in college of my dad and I took a trip out to Colorado, and we got to meet him at his gallery, and then he took us out to his studio, kind of showed us his whole setup, and it was just very influential for me. So that's kind of where I get this process from. Definitely want to give him credit. Painting, I've been painting a lot the last 2 weeks, doing a lot of those small pictures that are over on the table there, so 8x10s. Using this process and just trying to get really familiar with it, so when I demo for you, I sound like I know what I'm talking about. This is a painting I did using this process, and it was kind of a failure, so I just wanted to bring it with to show you. The reason it didn't work out is I didn't have enough acrylic on initially, so I wasn't able to lift down to the areas I wanted to. That might make a little more sense later on. Of the process that I'm going to use, it starts with acrylic, and I call it an undercoating. So it's basically going to be like a wet into wet wash over this entire piece of paper. That's going to dry. Then I'll do what's called a lift test to see if the acrylic sealed the paper or not. If my watercolor will lift off of it, then I know it's okay to proceed. If it doesn't, if it stains the paper, then I need to apply more acrylic. So I do that in the form of a clear coat. Once I have the proper undercoating, then I move on to watercolor, so to start building up my values, and then towards the end, I'll use gouache. Gouache is opaque for the most part, and I try to use that more in the negative spaces than as like positive highlights. So I think that's kind of the tendency for artists when they start using gouache, is that they will use it more as an afterthought versus kind of working it into their overall process. So I'm going to show you that approach tonight. And hopefully I don't have to eat my words. Hopefully it turns out. And what I will start with are called fluid acrylics. I prefer the Golden brand. If you go on their website online, you can find all the technical information you want, which I find really helpful. I use their acrylic paints for murals, and just really like the quality of the product they put out. So you can use normal acrylics if that's what you have. They just don't, you have to add a lot of water to them to get them fluid, which dilutes them, and they have less of an impact. Okay, so I'm starting with the full sheet here. The painting I'm actually going to do is 18 by 24, but I want you to see this initial step just so you kind of have an idea. So these are fluid acrylics. These are really concentrated. They have a higher pigment load than most regular acrylics. So a little bit goes a long way, is what I'm trying to tell you. Lately I've been adding a little bit of white into this initial step, which probably sounds pointless, because the paper's already white. But what it has allowed me to do is not have to put on that extra clear coat layer afterwards. So let's just see how this plays out. What kind of paper? This is, I think this is Arches, 140 pound full trap. Yep.
Would you repeat what she just said, because we can't hear it up here?
She, I think, was basically just asking why wouldn't she do that initial wash in watercolor? And it's a good question. The reason why is because acrylic is basically plastic, right? When it dries, it's permanent. And the idea here is that you start out with the acrylic, so you seal your paper. It's going to make it less absorbent. So any paint that you put over the top, like watercolor or gouache, is going to be, you're going to be able to lift it off in the end. And you'll kind of see an example of that as I go. Actually, I can show you right now if you want. This is a good time. I think it's, I've never used Yupo paper, but I think it's similar to that.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of groaning after I mentioned Yupo paper. This is a scary thing, this Yupo. That's a pretty bad spot to put that. One stroke. So, as you can see, I've already outlined my painting that I'm going to do tonight. So this got the same initial wash that I just showed you, and then I did one clear coat wash over the top. This is just Payne's Gray right here, and I put it on really thick, and that's what I call my lift test, so I just put on a thick black watercolor. And then if I can go in with clean water and wipe it off. And there is a little bit of a stain there, but it's not very noticeable, so that's kind of what I'm looking for. The reason why you might use this is a little harbor area on the coast of Oregon, so it's near Florence, Oregon. I don't have a real deep emotional attachment to this place. I just felt like it was a very scenic view, and I liked it, and so I decided to paint it. Try not to overthink it. What's that?
I see you've got dots on it.
Yep.
That's your grid method?
Yep. Yep. So I just, what I do is find the halfway point, then quarter it on all of the sides. Do the same thing in my watercolor paper, and then it's pretty easy to kind of line up the dots. That's a technique that John Salmonen showed us. St. Cloud, so similar to like folding your paper in half,
right,
and then again. Thing, right? So it's like if you put too much acrylic on, then you can't get any paint to stick, and if you put too little on, then you can't lift. So the that's part of the reason why I have this watered down, is that you can put it on in thin washes and build it up to that right slickness. Slickness, that's a technical term. Just go quickly around here. So for watercolors, I think this is brown madder. I don't really use these on the outside too much. Don't know what that is. I think that one's, I don't even know. You got those paints on your palette too? You're like, I put that in there like a year and a half ago. I don't remember what it is. Every once in a while you'll use it. The ones on the inner circle though, I use those quite a bit. It's cerulean, ultramarine, cobalt, phthalo, olive green, phthalo green, hooker's green dark. This is lemon yellow, cadmium yellow medium, don't use it. Raw sienna, cadmium red, cadmium orange, burnt sienna. I think this is cobalt violet, but I never use it. Permanent rose, Payne's Gray. But I really like this brown madder. I've been using that a lot. In this corner, this is like gouache. This is just white Da Vinci gouache. And this is white Da Vinci gouache mixed with Payne's Gray. So it's like a, just kind of a shortcut for me. It gives me a medium gray, those categories.
Sure,
this is just a study to determine, you know, when you look at this, you see colors. When you look at the photograph, you see colors. It's nice to be able to do a small sketch first to kind of see what the values are. So I'm going to start with watercolor. Try to get those right. It just makes it a little bit easier for paint. As a general rule of thumb, like if you were to take one of my workshops in this process, I would encourage you to hold off on the gouache till the very end. The reason for that, there's a little squeak to this table. The reason for that is gouache is going to have a tendency to make your other colors milky. So if you put it on too early and you start overlapping and mixing shapes, it's going to turn everything kind of chalky looking. So these first couple of washes are really just going to be blocking in the large areas of color, large areas of value. You got some very basic big shapes here. Let's try that brown matter I love so much. Ooh, do you hate it when you grab a little bit too much of the color? It's poisonous. Okay, it's pretty dark. Like that. So that's what I would recommend to you if you were in my class, is to kind of avoid that gouache till the end. Of course, you go and make a rule, and then the first thing you do is break it, you know. So you're going to see me doing kind of differently than that, but so these are going to be kind of generic shades of color. Not necessarily looking for this to be perfect right away. I can always adjust it later.
When you use watercolor this way, does it still dry 20% lighter?
Yeah, it still does.
Okay.
The thing with this acrylic undercoating, you have to use more paint to kind of get it to cover. If you go down with a really juicy wash that's like full of water, it's just going to beat up on here. So the colors you use are going to be kind of dark to begin with. Of course, unless you're using gouache. Everybody confused?
Say what you said at the beginning.
Oh, boy.
How far back?
Use more pigment is what you said, less water.
Hi, I'm Dan.
We were talking about something turning dark.
Something turning dark. Well, the gouache is going to dry darker.
Okay.
Watercolor dries lighter. Okay, so these are both positive shapes right here. This would be kind of a fun opportunity to show you. This paint's still wet. It wouldn't have to be wet for me to do this, but this is taking a smaller round brush. I'm going to go back in, kind of lift out. This is a thirsty brush, so I've rinsed it out, squeegeed it out. Now I can come back in and sort of retain some of those highlights on this ridge. You can't see all of the skin.
Oh, yeah.
Some of this will fade back. It won't be quite as dramatic.
Cool.
That's kind of nice, actually. Once in a while, you surprise yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed while I was painting the smaller sketch is there's a really nice transition in this shape from kind of a cooler, really dark, into more of an olive green with some burnt sienna in it. I didn't really feel like I captured it very well in the sketch, so that's one thing I'm going to try and do better. Okay, so ultramarine blue, Hooker's green. That can be dark enough. It's really dark. I'm a big fan of Payne's gray, so let's get this in here. Dark, cool color. Not too worried about details. Right now, or rendering anything, just kind of trying to block it in. So you always have this trick in the back of your pocket that you can lift something out if you like, if you cover that up, that line, that sail mast, you can always lift it out later. But I think it's a nice balance. It works out a little bit better if you can do both lifting and negative painting.
Oh, that keeps Frank awake.
I'm just curious if you can lift, why are you painting around those shapes?
Because I like that balance between positive painting and negative painting. So I think it just gives it a slightly different look. So why paint? You know what I mean by a negative painting? So the negative space is the, it's not the mass of the boat, it's the trees behind it. That's the space behind it. So these are all little negative shapes in here. Sounds like you're talking trash about something. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's the negative spaces,
Yeah.
Don't like those spaces, but they are actually really important. I think sometimes you can really struggle to paint something because you're too aware of what it is, you know what it is, and if you can focus on the background, the negative space, you can think about it purely in terms of shape. And, if you're struggling to paint it, that's a good way to just kind of mix it up. And also, you're going to paint it differently. It's going to be a different brush stroke. It's going to be, everything about it's just going to look a little bit different when you paint the negative space. So I think it's an asset for you. Maybe it needs a little bit more. Squeak is going to drive me nuts. You guys seriously can't hear that. Maybe I'll suggest some shadows. Actually kind of like that. Maybe at the same time, I'll bring some of that burnt sienna warmer color and come in here and sort of drop that in. Just sort of balance out the two sides. Okay. That's enough for now. I added this little figure in here, walking out to his boat.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to try and paint him in. If it doesn't work out, he's going to get lifted right off, swept out into the sea. How big I paint? Well, I have something, I don't have any examples with me, but something I've been developing over the last couple of years is mounting watercolor paper to aluminum panels. So it's actually called a polymetal. A common brand of it is Dibond. And you can use glue and adhesive and glue watercolor paper to it. It's really nice because you can you can paint any size. You don't have to worry about it getting framed or, the heavy glass, the heavy cost of that. So I painted watercolors. If you get the roll of watercolor paper,
Right.
I've mounted it and I've painted up to
The other, you don't have to climb up a ladder.
40.
So how many years have you been painting?
I started when I was 15.
I know, but I want to know how many years that is.
31, almost 32.
That's an old trick.
So yeah, 16, 17 years. Yeah, I mean, and speaking for myself specifically, I'm very fortunate to have, you know, my dad's a great
Yeah.
painter. To have that in the house and, you know, to get that constant critique, and I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
And then the Central Minnesota Watercolors, the group that Kathy and I belong to, that's a great organization. I mean, without something like that to tie into, I don't know what would have happened. I probably would have convinced myself I was going to go pro in hockey or something like that. I've been to this ice rink before in high school. We played hockey.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. Okay, this worked out pretty good actually, how the first half was all watercolor, second half's going to be mainly gouache. So you can see I've added a little bit of color up here. This is just my straight gouache and Payne's Gray mixture. And now, it's kind of gobbled up in my palette. Oh.
How is your gouache different than gesso?
Well, gouache remains soluble. Gesso dries permanent. Transparency and opaque. See if we can blend these together here a little bit. That's kind of nice. I had the shape built in right here that was going to echo the shape of the hillside, so I thought that was kind of a nice way to repeat that. And again right here. More paint. I'm going to try and hustle up. There's been a special request to make this go quicker so that some people can go to the local tavern or forget what you called it, but brew pub.
I was going to save a room for you, but I think you're too young.
Maybe you can sneak me in.
Photo ID.
31, almost 32 years old. And I look like I'm what, 22? And somebody said there's a 12-year-old up here painting. You'll laugh now. Eventually this will be to my advantage.
I know it will. Oh, I know it will.
The first time I did an art fair, and Dan came around talking, I thought, on Earth, this is and what have I done all my life?
Yeah, so I do the, see what shows do I do down here, the Loring Park Art Fair. Really like that one.
Yeah.
I did both Edina shows last year.
You need to do artist market.
Yeah, you should.
I'm going to do Artist Market.
John Salmon has done it. He's done
See?
it.
Well, if you're comparing me to John Salmon, then
Well, no, you mentioned it, so I thought,
yeah, no, sounds like I think Cassie's done it for a while. Sounds like a good gig.
she's.
Oh, you get a lot of exposure.
You can even
It's
demo.
indoors, out of the weather.
Yeah, you could demo there.
Good demo.
Hey, good idea.
We're getting you
I like the
now.
demo.
Getting them hooked now.
You gonna make me sign something on that wheel? Oh yeah.
We're just gonna hold up your check. Looks nice, doesn't it? The way this guy goes in there. Oh, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, looks like I didn't scare off too many people that left during halftime there, so that's good.
No, I haven't either. Nice
I
technique.
do dip from the gouache into my watercolor paints. It doesn't really bother me. I know that'd probably drive some of you nuts to have that gouache in your watercolor paints, but It just, I don't know. I don't care, I guess.
Does it ruin your brush at all? Do you use a watercolor brush? Go back and forth between the two?
No, watercolor and gouache are,
Watercolor.
yeah, they're both made, their binder is gum arabic.
Yeah.
So the difference between watercolor and gouache is that gouache has white pigment mixed in. The reason why you don't see it, because you can get gouache in any of these colors, it looks the same. The reason why you don't see it is because it's an extremely high pigment load. So it's so concentrated with pigment that you don't notice the white, but it's the white and the amount of pigment that makes it opaque. So you can use, I mean, you can grab a scoopful of cadmium yellow and put it on here. It's going to cover
Right.
opaque, but it's just not really designed for that. Ooh, that's a pretty rich blue.
Now that's gonna dry a little darker, isn't it?
It is. I think it's going to dry too dark.
Okay.
You know, darker than I want it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch to a little bit smaller flat brush here, hoping that I can get into some of these negative spaces easier.
Mhm.
So this is all white gouache with a little bit of Payne's gray, perhaps a little bit of cerulean blue mixed in. And then what I'm going to use for the final accent for lighter colors is going to be white gouache with a little bit of either cadmium yellow or raw sienna mixed in. So it's going to be just a little subtle temperature shift in the gouache. It's going to make a nice accent all on here. It's been a nice satellite TV, full kitchen,
In the garage?
literally nicer than my house. It's not an exaggeration. Nicer than the garage. Yeah, I don't know, it's nice. It's a couple $1 million shack, I would guess.
I have not worked with gouache in that way, I've just used it as sort of a minor fix it or something like that. But this is, it's so
Nice.
atmospheric in the sky there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of advantages to working with gouache. I really like this acrylic undercoating concept because you can, I'm not doing it that much in this painting, but you can really exploit lifting. But just in general, adding gouache to your palette and mixing it in, it's almost like it gives you a whole different set of colors to work with. That milky quality to it just, I don't know, I just don't see that happening in transparent watercolor. You know, transparent watercolor does amazing things for like vibrancy and
Sprayed a lot of water on the paper.
luminosity. You're correct. You got me.
She might not, that'll shoot her.
Yep, no, you're right. And one thing we've experimented, I think, Bart, we might have done that up in Cross Lake too, was putting the clear coat down as the water and then adding the colors to that.
Oh, when it was still wet?
Yeah, as a way of kind of avoiding that second step.
Yeah. Yeah, I see, yeah.
But I don't know if that ever,
You
I
better
don't know if
rinse-
we came to any conclusions as to whether that worked or not. But it sure seemed like a good idea. Gosh, I don't even know if I need that white gouache in there. Oh, let's try it.
Be nice.
So that was just straight white with a little bit of cadmium yellow. It almost looks the same as that undercoating.
He's off the screen.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Sam's there anyways. I suppose you'll put a little fire out there in that little peak of that trees.
What's that?
No, I'm just joking. Some people will put all the little details and
Oh,
like lose the big picture.
yeah. Yeah, I suppose at a certain point you just need to call it, don't you? This might be fun to lift. Down here. Something I could show you this, it's kind of a fun technique. I don't know if it'll work, but if the gouache is dry enough, you can come through with clean water, let it soak in a little bit, and lift it off. There. You really get a clean look to them.
You painted those small works over on the side. Did you personally mount them to the wood? Or do you have that process done?
Those are prints.
Yeah.
So yep, I just glued them. It's golden heavy gel matte is what I use for an adhesive. Just kind of roll it on, and we no longer have a rolling pin in our kitchen because I use it for that purpose. It's really not that much to it.
And you put that over the top.
I put what I put over the top was a product called GAC 100. It's a golden product. I use that because it's also really good for making things archival, creating barriers. So I actually put that over the masonite first. I was using, and then I glue the print to it, and then paving as long as I had the GAC out. Paving stones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Really technical. Art making supplies.
Well, your father gave you everything you needed, so this has been paving stones.
I like some of these details in here. I think that helps.
Are any of your brothers also artists now?
No. Not like this anyways. I think they're all, I think everybody's kind of has a creative outlet. But as far as do they paint or draw, not really. So I'll add a few.
Did the man make it in the picture?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's still
Still
he's
there.
kind of.
I would just love to see you play up that reddish orange rag that's laying right next to that blue tarp.
Yes.
But that's me.
I have it in my sketch painting, and thank you.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a few kind of bright red buoys that are in here.
Oh, yeah.
Nice,
Bingo.
nice accent color.
Right there on the Mississippi, just south of St. Cloud.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Isn't that where I said this was from?
Sarnell Hills.
Sure.
Ooh, this is gonna be a big signature. All right, that's done. Sign it, it's done.
Share tonight from Blick Art. I have a t-shirt to go to Lindy